souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn, and this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. I highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. So if you're not new to this channel, you may have noticed I haven't uploaded in almost a month. I've been extremely sick. I don't quite fully have my voice back. So if the audio sounds a little strange, it's just that my voice may go in and out throughout the video, but I really wanted to get back on to upload a video. So I apologize for the audio, but let's get right into today's story. The movie Scream was released in the summer of 1996, and the villain Ghostface was born. What moviegoers didn't know was the screenwriter Kevin Williamson got the inspiration for the movie Scream after watching a documentary about a series of murders that happened in Florida. These murders took place at the University of Florida campus in Gainesville, and they occurred only 6 years prior to the movie's release. Each August, students return to the University of Florida to start the fall semester. In August 1990, new students to the university were moving into their dorms and their off-campus apartments, and students who are returning are meeting up with old friends that they had made while they were attending in previous years. And it's usually a really busy, fun time for all of the students, and it brings a lot of life to Gainesville during this time. At the end of August in Gainesville, the streets are very crowded, and it's very easy for someone to slip in, blend in, even if they have very evil intentions. On August 29th, 1990, Sonja Larson and Christina Powell moved into the apartment 113 at the Williamsburg apartment complex. Both of them were freshmen at the University of Florida. Christina Powell, known as Christy, was born November 30th, 1972. Being the youngest of 7 children and the first in her family to attend college, she was absolutely overjoyed and so excited to start her time at university. Sonja Larson was getting a degree because she wanted to work with children, and one of her past supervisors, so when she was in high school, she had worked with young children, and her supervisor commented that she made an absolutely perfect personality to work with children. She was so loving and so engaged, and her supervisor knew her going on to get a university degree, to get a higher up position working with children, that she would be an absolute success. Without a doubt, the two 17-year-old girls would have gone on to do absolutely amazing things with their lives if they had not been brutally murdered by a serial killer on August 24th. An intruder entered their apartment around 3 a.m. through the rear door in their apartment. Christy, who had fallen asleep on the couch, the killer came in, stood over Christy's body, watched her sleeping, and then decided to head upstairs. While he was upstairs, he crept into Sonja's bedroom. He put duct tape over her mouth so it would muffle her cries. He brutally stabbed Sonja and then headed downstairs back to continue his attack, now on Christy. The killer placed duct tape over Christy's mouth. He then cut her clothing off and he R-worded her. He also cut off her nipples. He then flipped her over and stabbed her 5 times in the back. He then posed both girls' bodies in sexually suggestive positions, and this is usually done by killers to degrade the victim that they have killed and also to create shock and horror to whoever discovers the bodies. After the 2 attacks, both girls had been killed, but the intruder was not in a rush to leave their apartment. He actually took the time to take a shower because he was covered in blood from the brutal attack he had just inflicted on these 2 beautiful young girls. The next day, Christa Powell's sister had driven to Gainesville, Florida, and she had come to help Christy kind of unpack her things and get the apartment, set up exactly how the two girls would like it to be. When Christy's sister knocked on the apartment door, she did not get a response. And it was a little confusing to her because school had not started yet. So the girls had not begun their classes, and she knew that her sister was expecting her. So it was kind of weird to her that her sister would not be there when she arrived when she was expected. And back in these days, people didn't really have cell phones. Like, cell phones were very new at this time. So it was not common that any students would actually have cell phones where the sister could have called the Christy. Her sister then went to use a phone to contact Christy's parents about her concerns. So both of Christy's parents then drove to Florida to help to try to figure out what was going on. When the parents arrived at the apartment, they noticed that both girls' cars were in the parking spaces for the apartment. So they knew that the girls had not driven anywhere, and the parents were very, very concerned. They noticed a maintenance worker and asked him if he could unlock the door so that the parents could go inside to see what was going on. The maintenance worker was a little bit uncomfortable doing this, but what he suggested is that he would call the police, and once the police arrived, he would then let the police into the apartment. And that's exactly what happened. A police officer arrived, the maintenance worker opened the door, and that is when the police officer went in to the apartment and made the gruesome discovery that both girls had been brutally murdered in an absolutely horrific fashion. There was a fear among police that the killer may strike again, and they were 100% correct in that. And it wouldn't take long for him to commit his next murder. Christa Hoyt was born on November 20th, 1971. Unlike the first two victims, Christa did not attend the University of Florida. She attended the nearby Santa Fe Community College, where she was studying criminology because she had a passion and really wanted to work in law enforcement. Christa was part of the Explorer program at the Sheriff's Department. And what the Explorer program was it was a program for students who are studying criminology and have an interest in working in law enforcement, and it kind of gives them some experience at the Sheriff's Department to get more understanding than just what they will learn while attending classes. Christa was extremely responsible, and she was not someone who ever just didn't show up to work. It was extremely unlike her, and obviously the Sheriff's Department had heard about the murders at the University of Florida, so they immediately became concerned and decided to head to Christa's apartment to check on her just to make sure that she was okay. An officer knocked on Christa's door and did not get a response. He saw a nearby maintenance worker and asked the maintenance worker to open the apartment door for him. And because he was a police officer, the maintenance worker obviously opened the door for him. And just one thing I noticed while I'm going through and was researching this, there's always seems to be maintenance men available to open all of these apartment doors. And I was a little confused, like, I know I live in an apartment complex and there's not maintenance workers around my building constantly, but it's also, when I really thought about it, it's a whole bunch of new students moving in. So there's probably a lot that maintenance workers need to be there to assist maybe students with, or if there's issues once the students move in. So if you're just curious like me as to why there's always a maintenance worker, I'm assuming that would be the reason. When the officer entered her apartment, it was an absolutely gruesome scene. The police officer saw Christa's headless body sitting upright on her bed. He then looked to the bookcase, and the killer had obviously decapitated Christa, taken her head, put it on a bookshelf, and the head was directed so it looked like the head was looking at the body. And what in the Ed Kemper is going on right now? Like, wow. According to investigators, the killer had actually broken into Christa's apartment when she was not home and had waited for her to arrive. This was the police's theory at the time. Christa's killer had choked her before placing duct tape over her mouth. He had cut the clothes from her body, and he had also essayed her. He had then stabbed her several times in the back, and he had then cut her from her pubic bone all the way up to her chest bone. The police now had 3 very gruesome murders that needed to be solved, and they really had no idea who the perpetrator could have been. Gainesville was on edge, and everyone was afraid, and they were fearful of when this killer would strike again. On Sunday evenings, another student, Tracy Paules, got a phone call from a friend of hers who lived in another area, and she had called Tracy because she was concerned that she had heard about these 3 murders, and she was very worried that Tracy possibly could become a victim. Tracy told her friend that she wasn't that concerned because she lived with Manny Taboada. Manny was 24, he was 6'2", he was extremely strong, and she believed that if some intruder did come into the house, there's no question that Manny would be able to overpower them. So she felt quite safe because she was living with Manny. And the 2 friends did agree that if anything happened, Manny would be able to defend her. Manny Taboada was born on September 14th, 1966. Manny was attending the University of Florida, the College of Architecture. He was studying to become an architect. He and Tracy shared an apartment at the Gatorwood apartment complex. The killer broke into Manny and Tracy's apartment at 3 a.m. on August 27th. Police believe that when the killer broke in, the killer was not expecting Manny to be there. Manny was actually asleep on the couch. So police believe that he was quite startled, the killer, when he walked in and saw this very strong young man. Using a K-bar knife, the killer had stabbed Manny in the chest, which obviously woke Manny up. Manny did manage to stand up to try to fight off the killer, but the killer was able to overpower him and ended up stabbing Manny over 30 times. Tracy was awoken by all of the noise. She came out of her bedroom and saw that Manny was being stabbed to death. So she ran back to her bedroom and locked the door, but that didn't stop the killer. Once he had subdued Manny, he simply went to Tracy's room and kicked open the door. As he had done previously, he put duct tape over Tracy's mouth. He then cut off her clothes, essayed her, and then stabbed her 3 times in the back. With Manny and Tracy both now dead, he posed Tracy's body in a sexually suggestive position, and he had just left Manny's body laying on the floor of the living room where he had died, and then he left the apartment. A few of Tracy's friends had been calling, trying to get in contact with her the next day, and because they weren't receiving a response, and because of all the murders that had been occurring, they decided to drive over to her apartment. When they arrived at the apartment, they saw both Tracy and Manny's cars in the parking lot. Again, the doors locked, they couldn't get in. They found another maintenance worker and asked the maintenance worker if he could open the door, which the maintenance worker did do. And that is when Tracy's friend discovered the dead bodies of both Manny and Tracy. The media at this point named the killer the Gainesville Ripper. The entire community was terrified. Many parents just took their kids out of school and brought them back home to keep them completely away from Gainesville. Stores closed before dark, and the police warned the community to be extremely vigilant. Police determined very early on that it was the same person who had committed all 5 murders. Over 600 police officers and FBI agents created a task force. Police told the media that the killer, after committing the murders, did not normally immediately leave the apartment. He would actually spend time in the apartment after he had committed the murders. One thing that he had done with all of the women he had essayed, he would pour cleaning liquid over the women's vaginal area. And he was doing this in an attempt to try to destroy his DNA using these kind of cleaning liquids. Thankfully, he was not successful in destroying his DNA in this way. Thousands of leads came in, and the police publicly announced a suspect. He was an 18-year-old part-time student at the University of Florida. His name was Edward Humphrey. Edward had pulled a knife on students a few days before the murders of Christy and Sonja. He remained incarcerated throughout the investigation. Other witnesses had told police that they had witnessed Edward walking through the woods behind the campus carrying knives. Edward had even assaulted his grandmother with a knife. I mean, you gotta be pretty sick to attack any elderly woman and your own grandmother. I don't know, these people. Investigators believed that Edward was the Gainesville Ripper, but this would all change after an arrest on September 7th, 1990. 36-year-old Daniel Rawlings was arrested on September 7th after holding a gun to the head of a grocery store employee. After his arrest, he had a competency hearing. He confessed to the psychiatrist that he was the one who had committed the 5 murders. Danny also gave details in the confession to the psychiatrist that somebody in the public would not know. He said that when he had murdered Christa Hoyt, he had forgot his wallet. So he had killed her and then left the apartment, realized he forgot his wallet. He goes back to the apartment to get his wallet, and it was at that point he decided to decapitate her. But the psychiatrist decided, because of patient confidentiality, he was not going to tell the police about this confession. Obviously, patient confidentiality is something that is taken very seriously, but if a patient confesses to something and is proven to be an ongoing threat to the public, the doctor can 100% go to the police and tell them about the confession. But this doctor decided that because Daniel was in custody for a robbery, he was not a threat to the public. And it's like, this guy's in jail for burglary. He is a serial killer. Like, yeah, you need to tell the fucking police. He's a danger, report him. But the doctor felt like the police, they would eventually figure it out on their own. Like, he's a serial killer, no rush. The investigators back in Gainesville still had Edward Humphrey as the main suspect. So the police decided to use VICAP, which is the Violent Crime Apprehension Program computer system. So basically what VICAP does is, if a crime is committed, police will go in and put in details of those crimes. They're not necessarily solved or unsolved crimes. It just gives details of particular things in the crime, so that then police, who in this case obviously are investigating, they can go to VICAP and try to see if there are similar crimes that were committed that they could compare with the crimes that were committed in Gainesville. And when they entered in the details of the murders in Gainesville, it came back with a match to an unsolved murder in Shreveport, Louisiana. Julie Grissom was the victim who was murdered in Shreveport. And there were striking similarities between her unsolved murder and the murders that were being committed in Gainesville. It was exact same thing. She was duct taped. She was then SA'd. Her body was left in a sexual position to degrade her, and she had been stabbed in the back. So there was a lot of similarities between the crimes. During the murder of Julie, while the murder was taking place, her father and her 7-year-old nephew arrived at her home. And the killer then, after he had killed Julie, killed the father and the 7-year-old nephew as well. 2 members of the Gainesville task force decided to travel to Shreveport, Louisiana to speak with the officers there to compare the 2 cases. Detectives in Shreveport told the task force members that Daniel Rawlings had come up many times in the investigation of the murder of Julie, her father, and her 7-year-old nephew. When they checked the background of Daniel Rawlings, there was actually a warrant out for his arrest for an attempted murder. The victim was actually Daniel Rawlings' father, who he claimed to have shot after suffering years of abuse at the hands of his father. Also, his father was a Shreveport, Louisiana police officer. So who the hell is this piece of shit, Daniel Rawlings? Daniel was born May 26, 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He had had a very troubled childhood. He had been severely abused by his father, and the abuse from his father began as young as when Daniel was only 1 year old. And the father beat Daniel, a 1-year-old, because he thought that he was crawling wrong. Like, you're judging a 1-year-old's crawling? And you think then assaulting the child is going to make them crawl better? Like, make it make sense. I don't know. Daniel also had received extreme emotional abuse from his mother, Claudia, as well as he witnessed the abuse between his father, who would abuse his mother as well. He had been expelled from school in the 8th grade for fighting, and he had a criminal record by the time he was a teenager. He had several convictions for armed robbery across 3 different states. When the police looked into Daniel, they realized that he had been in custody since September, which is exactly when the murders had stopped occurring. The task force was very interested to look into the armed robbery, which had occurred in the same time frame as the murders in Gainesville. The robbery had occurred at the First Union Bank in Gainesville, and when Daniel had tried to escape after the bank robbery, he ran into the woods behind the bank, which led to the University of Florida. Police officers had used search dogs to search the woods after the robbery, and they came upon a campsite. Now, at this campsite was a dye bag. So, you know, if someone robs a bank, a lot of times at the bank, they try to include a dye pack. So when the robber gets the money and leaves, once they open it, dye goes all over it, ruins the money. And a lot of times will leave dye marks on the person who's robbed the bank. So it's a way that in bank robberies, they try to use this to try to catch the robbers. And at the campsite, they also found a ski mask, duct tape, and knives. Another thing that they had found was an audio tape, and all of this evidence had gone into storage because obviously they have these 5 murders they're trying to solve. So a robbery is probably not going to be their top priority. So eventually they do go and they listen to this audio tape, and it was a very bizarre audio tape. On it, Daniel sings, "I love my dad, I love my mom, I love my brother," in this like really creepy way. And he does on the tape identify himself as Daniel Rawlings. That's how police knew that this was a tape that he himself had created. 3 of the 5 Gainesville Ripper victims had DNA that police were able to take samples of. What they had done originally was they had compared the DNA from the 3 victims that had DNA, and so they were able to confirm all these murders are connected. But then they ran the DNA against Daniel Rawlings and found out it's his DNA. So they had just caught the Gainesville Ripper. A grand jury indicted Daniel on November 15th, 1991 for the murders of Sonja, Christa, Christy, Tracy, and Manny. And Edward Humphrey, who had originally been a suspect, he was cleared of all charges relating to the Gainesville murders. Daniel ended up pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. Once he realized that that wasn't going to work, he decided to confess in probably the weirdest way I've ever heard of. So the confession is really weird how it was done. So in the room, you've got obviously the police, the FBI, and then you have Daniel Rawlings and his cellmate. So Daniel is telling them that he's going to confess to the murders, but he won't confess directly. So what happens is Daniel whispers into his cellmate's ear. The cellmate then repeats what Daniel said to the police and the FBI. And then Daniel would like nod and confirm that the cellmate was saying what he had just told him. So I don't know what the hell that was about, but okay. Daniel Rawlings eventually confessed to all 5 murders in February 1994, and he did this in an attempt to avoid the death penalty. But guess what, Danny boy, it didn't work. He was sentenced to death. And obviously, you're sentenced to death. You're going to do your appeals. He went through all the appeals, and he's still, we're still going to kill you. He was executed on October 25th, 2006, 16 years after the murders had been committed. And during his execution, some of the family members of the victims attended his execution. So that is the story of the Gainesville Ripper. If you enjoyed the video and you'd like to support the channel, please give the video a like. Please make a comment. Let me know what you think about this whole crazy situation. I always love knowing your thoughts, and I appreciate all the love and support that I receive from you guys constantly. It is absolutely amazing, and it's very motivating to keep going and making these videos. I will let you know I'm no longer sick. My voice is a little bit kind of goes in and out, but I'll be back to regularly uploading every week now that I can actually speak and you could hear me. So I hope the audio wasn't too bad in this video, because I can tell right now I'm starting to lose my voice. But I just want to send a huge thank you and lots of love to all of you for helping me build this channel. You guys are such an amazing community. I love all of your thoughts and opinions, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.